The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton glitters under crystal chandeliers as Manhattan's elite mingle at the Moonlight Charity Gala. Champagne flows freely while designer gowns swish against Italian marble floors. In this sea of luxury stands Lena Winters, 32, fidgeting uncomfortably at the edge of the crowd, her modest dress a stark contrast to the couture surrounding her. Her worn nude flats shift nervously against the polished floor as she clutches her small purse. Across the room, socialite Victoria Sheffield, dripping in diamonds and wrapped in Valentino, spots Lena with narrowed eyes. With a predatory smile, Victoria glides toward her, champagne flute dangling between manicured fingers. Well, she announces loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Looks like the help got confused about their invitation. Heat floods Lena's face as heads turn, eyes scanning her from head to toe. Victoria's grip is surprisingly strong as she pulls Lena toward the center of the room, where a magnificent grand piano sits spotlighted. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria announces, voice dripping with mock excitement, "since our entertainment has canceled, perhaps the help would like to entertain us?" Phones rise in unison, cameras pointed at Lena's mortified face. Trembling, she finds herself pushed onto the piano bench as wealthy spectators gather, hungry for the humiliation they're certain will follow. The Moonlight Foundation annual gala represents the pinnacle of New York's social calendar, where tables cost $50,000, 0 cents, and entrance requires either generational wealth or exceptional connections. Swarovski crystal centerpieces catch the light as waiters in tailored tuxedos weave through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne. The guest list reads like a who's who of fashion designers, tech billionaires, and old money families, all gathered ostensibly for charity, but primarily for social positioning. Earlier this evening, panic had erupted among the event organizers when the renowned concert pianist scheduled to perform had canceled due to sudden illness. For Lena Winters, being at this gala wasn't about social climbing or networking with the elite. Just 3 years ago, Lena had been a rising star at Juilliard, her fingers dancing across piano keys with such passion and precision that her professors had predicted a brilliant future on the world's greatest stages. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Her mother's devastating stroke, leaving the woman who had sacrificed everything to nurture Lena's talent partially paralyzed and unable to care for herself. Without hesitation, Lena had abandoned her scholarship and dreams, moving back to their small Queens apartment to become her mother's caretaker. Between shifts as a nurse's aide at the local hospital, she teaches piano to neighborhood children for $15, 0 cents per lesson, the meager income barely making a dent in the $187,000, 0 cents of medical debt that grows each month. Tonight, Maria, a sympathetic kitchen worker who had heard Lena practicing on an old upright piano in the hospital's chapel, had slipped her an invitation to observe the gala. "Maybe you can make some connections for better gigs," Maria had whispered, pressing the embossed card into Lena's hand. That morning, Lena had carefully ironed her mother's 20-year-old black dress, the only formal garment she owned, and applied makeup to hide the dark circles beneath her eyes. Her mother had smiled weakly from her bed, reaching out to touch the fabric she'd once worn to concerts, her eyes saying what her damaged speech could not: "Make me proud." Now, as Lena sits frozen at the piano bench, that promise hangs heavy in the air around her. An hour earlier, before Victoria's public humiliation, Lena had tried to blend into the background, observing the glittering crowd while her stomach growled with hunger. The buffet table beckoned from across the room, a lavish display of delicacies that would cost her a week's salary at the hospital. Gathering her courage, she made her way toward the food, hoping to discreetly grab a small plate before returning to her corner. Fashion designer Morgan Reed, whose dresses cost more than Lena's annual rent, noticed her approach and swiftly moved to intercept. With an elegant arm extended like a barrier, Morgan's Botoxed face contorted into a manufactured smile. "Excuse me," Morgan said loudly, blocking Lena's path to the buffet. "The catering staff eats in the kitchen, darlin'." Lena's empty stomach twisted painfully as nearby guests turned to stare, their eyes dismissive as they assessed her out-of-date dress and modest appearance. I'm a guest," Lena managed to whisper, though her voice lacked conviction even to her own ears. Morgan's perfectly lined eyebrows arched in disbelief as she looked Lena up and down, taking in her scuffed shoes and drugstore makeup. "Of course you are," she replied with a condescending pat on Lena's arm. "And I'm the Queen of England." As Lena retreated, her cheeks burning with humiliation, her mind flashed back to 6 months earlier, standing in a pawn shop, selling her beloved collection of piano books that had survived dozens of moves and hardships. The shopkeeper had offered her a fraction of their worth, barely enough for a month's worth of her mother's medication. With trembling hands, she had handed over everything except a single, worn copy of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, her mother's favorite piece, the one they had listened to together throughout her childhood. "This one stays with me," she had whispered, clutching it to her chest while signing away her musical heritage. From across the room, Victoria Sheffield watches Lena's retreat with calculating eyes, noticing how her gaze lingers longingly on the grand piano at the center of the ballroom. As Lena tried to recover from Morgan's public dismissal, she found herself backed against a tall glass window, attempting to become invisible among the potted plants decorating the perimeter. Event coordinator Melissa frantically worked her phone nearby, panic evident in her voice as she begged various contacts to provide last-minute entertainment. "We have 200 of Manhattan's wealthiest donors getting restless," Melissa hissed into her phone, "and they're not paying $50,000, 0 cents a table, to stare at each other." Lena couldn't help but overhear the conversation, her fingers unconsciously moving against her thigh, playing phantom piano keys to the background music, a habit from childhood that emerged in moments of anxiety. Her subtle movements caught the attention of hedge fund manager Derek Prentice, who nudged his colleague and smirked. With deliberate precision, Derek moved through the crowd toward Lena, 2 champagne flutes in hand. As he approached, he appeared to trip, though anyone watching closely would have noticed the calculated nature of his stumble. Cold champagne splashed down the front of Lena's dress, soaking through the thin fabric to her skin. "Oops. Well, it's not like I ruined anything expensive," Derek announced loudly, his voice carrying across the quiet corner. No one offered napkins or assistance as Lena stood frozen, the expensive champagne seeping through her only decent dress, the cherished garment that had once belonged to her mother. As Lena desperately dabbed at her dress with a small cocktail napkin, fighting back tears that threatened to ruin her carefully applied drugstore mascara, she remembered her mother's face the day she had gifted her the dress. "For your graduation recital," her mother had said proudly, presenting the carefully saved-for garment with hands that had grown calloused from working 2 jobs to support Lena's musical education. "Someday you'll wear this on the world's greatest stages." Now the dress clung to her skin, champagne seeping through to her underwear, as Derek high-fived another executive with a triumphant laugh. Across the room, Melissa's desperate eyes landed on Lena, calculating, assessing, seeing not a human being but a potential solution to her entertainment crisis. Social media influencer Amber Wells, whose 2.4 million followers eagerly await her posts about elite social gatherings, spotted the commotion surrounding Lena. With practiced stealth, she raised her phone, capturing a close-up of disheveled Lena still dabbing at her soaked dress. Manicured thumbs moved swiftly across the screen, crafting a caption designed for maximum engagement. "Who let the cleaning lady into the gala?" The post went live seconds later, notifications immediately flooding in as Amber's followers delighted in the casual cruelty. 10,000 likes accumulated in under a minute as the post spread through the digital ecosystem like wildfire. Melissa, the frantic event coordinator, finally approached Lena directly, desperation etched into every line of her face. "Please tell me you play," she whispered urgently, nodding toward the piano. "Just something, anything, to buy us some time while we find a real musician." Before Lena could respond, Victoria Sheffield materialized beside them, her grip surprisingly strong as she clasped Lena's elbow. "Let's see what our little charity case can do," Victoria announced to the gathering crowd, her voice carrying across the now quiet room. Phones rose throughout the ballroom, ready to capture what everyone assumed would be the ultimate humiliation. Amber positioned herself for the perfect angle, already imagining the engagement metrics on her follow-up post. Morgan and Derek exchanged amused glances as Victoria practically dragged Lena toward the spotlight-illuminated grand piano at the center of the room. Lena felt her feet moving forward as if in a dream, her soaked dress clinging uncomfortably to her legs, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. The sea of expensive phones pointed at her like weapons, ready to capture and distribute her humiliation to millions of strangers. As Lena was pushed onto the piano bench, time seemed to slow. The spotlights felt hot against her skin, hundreds of eyes boring into her with predatory anticipation. A memory flashed, her mother's voice from years ago. When you play, forget everything else, it's just you and the music. With a deep breath, Lena straightened her spine, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands above the keys. A single devastating chord from Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 explodes through the ballroom, so powerful it seems to shake the crystal chandeliers. Silence. Then a storm. Lena's fingers transform into lightning across the keys, revealing a mastery that only comes from thousands of hours of practice and something deeper, the kind of emotional depth that emerges only through profound suffering. A collective gasp ripples through the crowd as wealthy patrons freeze, champagne flutes suspended mid-air. Victoria's smug smile dissolves into open-mouthed shock. Derek stops mid-conversation, his head snapping toward the piano as if pulled by invisible strings. Morgan's hand clutches her chest, expensive bracelets jangling as the mood in the room transforms from mockery to astonishment. One by one, phones lower, their owners too, transfixed by the unexpected brilliance unfolding before them, to remember why they'd raised them in the first place. Waitstaff pause in their duties, trays balanced forgotten in their hands as they turn toward the music. Lena's eyes close. Her body swaying slightly with the emotional force of her playing, completely surrendered to the peace that has lived in her heart through years of sacrifice and struggle. Her technical precision is flawless, but it's the raw emotion flowing through every note that renders the audience speechless, the palpable yearning, the defiance, the triumph woven through Rachmaninoff's complex harmonies. For 7 minutes, not a single person in the room moves or speaks, the entire gathering held captive by the unexpected virtuoso in their midst, a woman they had dismissed as invisible moments before. Goosebumps rise on exposed arms throughout the ballroom as Lena's performance builds toward its thunderous conclusion. Tears form in the eyes of hardened socialites who haven't been genuinely moved by anything in decades. Time itself seems suspended, the normal rules of the universe temporarily paused by the transcendent power of true artistry. The final movement surges through the space, Lena's fingers a blur across the keys, her body now fully engaged in communion with the instrument. As the last chord reverberates through the stunned ballroom, Lena's hands finally lift from the keys, her eyes slowly opening to the transformed world before her. The silence following Lena's final note stretches for 3 heartbeats before erupting into thunderous applause. Champagne glasses are hastily set down to free hands for clapping. Melissa, the event coordinator, looks shell-shocked, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly as she stares at the performer she had dismissed as a desperate solution. Victoria Sheffield's face has drained of color, her perfectly manicured hand clutching her cocktail so tightly her knuckles have turned white. As the applause continues to build, a distinguished man in an impeccable Tom Ford suit emerges from the back of the crowd, moving purposefully toward the piano. The man approaches Lena with quiet confidence, his presence commanding enough that people step aside to create a path. Gabriel Winters, 38, the notoriously reclusive tech billionaire whose name regularly appears on lists of the world's wealthiest individuals, takes Lena's hand and tenderly kisses it. "My wife," he announces to the now gasping crowd, "plays beautifully, doesn't she?" The room erupts in shocked whispers as cameras flash frantically, capturing the moment when Manhattan's elite realize they've been publicly humiliating the spouse of the man whose charitable donation they've been desperate to secure all evening. Victoria's champagne glass slips from her fingers, shattering dramatically on the marble floor. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," Gabriel continues, his voice quiet yet carrying effortlessly across the now silent room. "I'm Gabriel Winters, the anonymous donor who pledged $50 million to the Moonlight Foundation." He pauses, his arm protectively around Lena's waist. "I wanted to see the foundation's true character before finalizing my commitment, to understand how this organization treats people when they believe no one of consequence is watching." His gaze sweeps across Victoria, Morgan, and Derek, each withering under his direct stare. "I sent my wife ahead as my eyes and ears, and what I witnessed tonight tells me everything I need to know about the culture of this organization." Gabriel's voice takes on an edge of steel as he delivers the final blow. "I am withdrawing my entire pledge, effective immediately. I cannot in good conscience support an institution that fosters such elitism and cruelty at its core." The foundation director stumbles forward, face ashen, but Gabriel raises a hand to silence him. My family's charitable focus has always been organizations that recognize the dignity of every human being, regardless of their perceived status or utility. His eyes find Melissa, the coordinator who had begged Lena to play out of desperation. I also find it particularly disturbing that my wife's pianist resume was in your application file all along, ignored because of her address and lack of connections. By morning, the video of Lena's performance, and Gabrielle's subsequent revelation, has exploded across every social media platform. News outlets play the clip on repeat, analyzing every moment of the wealthy elite's humiliation of a world-class pianist they had mistaken for the help. The stock market opens to immediate consequences as the story's impact ripples through financial sectors connected to the night's most prominent bullies. For those who had participated in Lena's humiliation, the fallout is swift, devastating, and meticulously quantifiable. Fashion designer Morgan Reed watches in horror as celebrities publicly distance themselves from her brand, canceling appearances and endorsement deals worth millions. Her phone buzzes constantly with cancellation notices as her social media feeds fill with the video clip of her blocking Lena from the buffet. Her cruel words now captioned and shared by millions. By midday, mascara streams down her face as she frantically calls her publicist, who informs her that damage control may be impossible. The public has declared her brand toxic. "They're calling it Hungergate," her publicist explains wearily. "No one wants to be associated with a designer who starves people." Derek Prentice stares in disbelief at his trading terminal as investors frantically withdraw from his hedge fund, citing ethical concerns and brand association risks. Major clients release statements about aligning their investments with their values, pointedly mentioning inclusivity and respect. His partners call an emergency meeting, their voices strained as they discuss the Prentice liability and potential rebranding strategies. By afternoon, Derek's assistant quietly clears out her desk as the board votes unanimously to distance the firm from its founding partner. The nameplate on his door is removed before the closing bell. Influencer Amber Wells watches in real time as her follower count plummets, her carefully constructed digital empire crumbling with each passing hour. Her sponsors send termination notices, citing morality clauses in her contracts. Other influencers publicly denounce her, eager to separate themselves from the toxic fallout. Her agent stops returning calls. By evening, Amber films a tearful apology video that only accelerates her follower exodus, the internet collectively declaring her canceled as compilation videos of her past problematic behaviors surface with relentless efficiency. The Moonlight Foundation faces its own existential crisis as 7 board members resign by midday, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Victoria Sheffield receives formal dismissal letters from all 7 charity boards she once proudly served on, her social calendar suddenly devastatingly empty. Melissa, the event coordinator, clears out her desk under security supervision, her resume now permanently tainted by her very public failure to recognize and respect extraordinary talent regardless of appearance. The foundation director issues a groveling public apology that satisfies no one, too late to stop major donors from publicly redirecting their charitable giving to more inclusive organizations. By nightfall, the foundation's future remains uncertain, their reputation damaged beyond easy repair. 6 months later, a renovated former community center in Lena's childhood Queens neighborhood bustles with activity. Sunlight streams through large windows, illuminating the Winters Music Academy's state-of-the-art facilities where students of all backgrounds gather to receive free classical training from world-class instructors. Lena moved through the bright hallways, stopping occasionally to offer guidance to a struggling student or praise to a diligent one. Her mother, now receiving the best medical care available, watches proudly from her wheelchair as her daughter's dream, not of personal fame, but of creating opportunity for others, takes magnificent shape. In the main performance hall, a plaque dedicates this space to Elizabeth Winters, who sacrificed everything so music could live. The aftermath of the gala night changed trajectories for everyone involved. Morgan Reed now designs uniforms for a national fast food chain, her luxury label dissolved after retailers pulled her merchandise from shelves. Derek Prentice works as a junior analyst at a small firm across the country, his name effectively blacklisted in Manhattan financial circles. Amber Wells manages social media for a pet food company, her influencer days behind her as she rebuilds her life away from the spotlight. Most dramatically, Victoria Sheffield, whose cruel spotlight on Lena had started it all, now works as an administrative assistant at a music school across town. Her social connections evaporated overnight following the viral video. She watches the academy from across the street sometimes, a different kind of hunger in her eyes now. Not for status, but for redemption. In the academy's main hall, Lena sits at a grand piano surrounded by eager children, their faces reflecting the hope her music represents. She plays the same Rachmaninoff piece that changed everything, but now with joy instead of defiance, her fingers dancing across keys that will never again be denied their voice. Gabriel stands in the doorway, watching with quiet pride as his wife's legacy takes shape in the transformed lives of students who might otherwise never have discovered their gift. Talent doesn't need designer labels to shine. True character reveals itself in how we treat those we believe can't help us. And sometimes, the most powerful response to cruelty is simply to show your true brilliance. If Lena's story moved you today, remember that we all have hidden talents and worth that deserve recognition. Share in the comments a time when you were underestimated and how you proved them wrong. Your story matters, and we want to hear it. Get that little lady out of here. This ain't no place for housewives. The burly rangemaster yanks the rifle from Charlotte Miller's hands, spilling her ammunition across the floor. The entire shooting range erupts in laughter as she scrambles to collect the scattered bullets. "Women like you should stick to baking cookies, not handling firearms," he sneers, deliberately stepping on her shooting glasses, crushing them beneath his boot. A circle forms around her, phones recording her humiliation. "This'll go viral for sure," someone whispers, loudly enough for her to hear. Charlotte slowly rises, a strange calm settling over her features. Her fingers touch a worn military patch sewn into the inside of her jacket. Her eyes, once soft, harden to steel as she scans the mocking faces surrounding her. But they had just humiliated the wrong woman. I wonder where you're watching this story from today, and if you've ever witnessed a public humiliation that made your blood boil. Those moments when someone is judged unfairly by their appearance stay with us, don't they? Would you have stood up for Charlotte? Or would you have been another silent bystander in that crowded Texas shooting range? Charlotte Miller was nothing special to look at. At least that's what everyone in Austin, Texas seemed to think. At 38, she was just another single mom, driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door, living in a modest 3-bedroom home in a forgettable subdivision on the outskirts of the city. 5 days a week, she sat behind a desk at Lakeside Community College, processing faculty paperwork and answering phones with a gentle, "Administrative services, how may I help you?" Her colleagues barely noticed her beyond the occasional nod in the hallway or the polite "thank you" when she distributed mail to their departmental boxes. On weekends, she could be found at her daughter Lily's soccer games, selling homemade cookies at the PTA bake sale or tending to her small vegetable garden. If anyone had bothered to create a character sketch of Charlotte Miller, unremarkable would have been the first word on the page. She shopped at Target, drove through Whataburger on busy evenings, and occasionally treated herself to a caramel macchiato at the local Starbucks. Her life was so thoroughly ordinary that it was almost invisible, which was exactly how Charlotte wanted it. That Saturday morning had started like any other. Charlotte had made Lily breakfast before dropping her off at a friend's house for a birthday sleepover. She'd promised her brother David she would finally use his birthday gift to her, a beginner's shooting course at Blue Ridge Shooting Range. "You live alone with Lily, Char," he'd insisted when she'd protested the gift. "You should know how to protect yourself. The neighborhood's not getting any safer." Charlotte had reluctantly agreed, though the thought of handling a firearm made her stomach knot with anxiety. Not because she was afraid of guns, no, that wasn't it at all, but because guns brought back memories she'd spent 15 years carefully burying. She pulled her Civic into the Starbucks drive-thru for liquid courage before heading to the range, ordering her usual vanilla latte. A small comfort before facing what she knew would be an uncomfortable day. The barista at the window, a college kid with bright blue hair, handed her the drink with the usual "have a nice day," completely unaware that for Charlotte, this particular day would change everything. What the patrons and staff at Blue Ridge couldn't possibly know was that before settling into civilian life, before her failed marriage to Lily's father, before becoming just another mom, Charlotte had another identity entirely. 15 years earlier, she had been Staff Sergeant Charlotte Eagle Eye Miller, one of the most decorated female snipers in Marine Corps history, with 3 tours in Afghanistan and a service record that remained partially classified. A traumatic injury to her right leg and the subsequent birth of her daughter had led to her honorable discharge and a deliberate decision to build a quiet, anonymous life away from her military past. Charlotte hadn't fired a weapon in years, preferring to leave that chapter closed. But the recent break-ins in her neighborhood, including one just 3 doors down on Meadowlark Lane, where the Johnsons had been tied up while thieves ransacked their home, had made her brother's gift seem prudent. She never imagined her first trip back to a range would unleash the very world she'd tried so hard to escape, or that her carefully constructed ordinary life would crumble in an instant. As Charlotte pulled into the parking lot of Blue Ridge Shooting Range, she took a deep breath. Just a basic safety course, she reminded herself. No one needs to know. She tucked her military ID deeper into her wallet, behind her driver's license and Kroger loyalty card. She wore her most mom-like outfit, jeans, sneakers, and a light blue cardigan over a simple white t-shirt. Nothing about her appearance suggested anything other than suburban normality. She'd even left her hair in its usual practical ponytail, rather than the tight bun she'd worn for years while serving. This was just Charlotte Miller, administrative assistant and mother, here to learn self-defense, nothing more. She glanced at herself in the rearview mirror, practicing the slightly nervous smile of a first-time shooter, rehearsing being ordinary one last time before stepping out of her car. The Texas sun beat down on the asphalt parking lot, making the air shimmer with heat. Country music drifted from the open door of the range, along with the occasional crack of gunfire. Charlotte squared her shoulders and headed for the entrance, her right leg giving the faintest hint of a limp, the only visible reminder of the IED that had ended her military career and started her journey toward invisibility. The trouble started the moment Charlotte pushed open the heavy glass door to the range. The reception area was crowded with weekend warriors, men in tactical gear they'd never need in suburban Austin, showing off expensive firearms and swapping exaggerated stories of marksmanship. Conversations quieted momentarily as she approached the counter, a few raised eyebrows and smirks following her progress across the room. "I'm here for the beginner's safety course," she said quietly to the young man behind the counter. He looked her up and down, barely concealing his amusement. "Ladies' Day isn't until Tuesday," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "But I guess we can fit you in, if you're really determined." Heat rose to Charlotte's cheeks, but she simply nodded and filled out the required paperwork, ignoring the chuckles around her. This was just the beginning of what would become a gauntlet of humiliation, each layer more public and more cutting than the last. The clipboard trembled slightly in her hands, not from nervousness, but from the effort it took to restrain the cutting response that 15 years ago would have silenced the room. She'd spent so long training herself to be unremarkable that even this mild confrontation felt like stepping into a spotlight she'd deliberately avoided. "Oh, look who thinks she can shoot a gun," came a familiar voice from behind her. Charlotte turned to find Derek Thompson, her next-door neighbor, grinning at her in disbelief. He was standing with a group of friends, all wearing matching shirts from their local gun club, the Lone Star Shooters logo emblazoned across their chests. "Aren't you the same woman who screamed when she saw a spider last week? This should be entertaining." His friends joined in immediately. "What's next, Charlotte? Monster truck driving?" They snickered, making exaggerated, fearful faces, mimicking her supposed fragility. Charlotte forced a smile. "Hello, Derek. Just trying something new." She turned back to the counter, hoping he'd lose interest, but Derek wasn't finished. "Hey guys, remember when she asked me to open a pickle jar because it was too tight, and now she wants to handle a firearm? This I gotta see." The laughter grew louder, attracting more attention. Charlotte kept her eyes down, focusing on the liability waiver she was signing, her hand steady despite the flush of embarrassment spreading across her face. 15 years ago, she could have field-stripped an M4 rifle in under 40 seconds blindfolded. Now she was being mocked for needing help with a pickle jar. A jar she'd asked for help with only because she'd tweaked her wrist carrying Lily's science project into school that morning. Before Charlotte could escape to the classroom area, she heard another familiar voice. "Charlotte Miller? At a shooting range? This is too good." Rebecca Sawyer, a former college friend who now ran a popular suburban mom blog, materialized beside her, phone already in hand. Without asking permission, Rebecca snapped several pictures of Charlotte. "Wait till the PTA sees this," The quiet cookie baker playing with guns. Charlotte reached out to block the camera. Rebecca, please don't post those. Rebecca rolled her eyes, tucking her phone away but not deleting the photos. Honey, you nearly fainted during our college self-defense class, remember? The instructor had to catch you, she announced loudly, ensuring everyone nearby heard about Charlotte's supposed incompetence. I'm just here to learn some self-defense, Charlotte explained softly. Rebecca patted her arm condescendingly. Sure, sweetie, just try not to shoot yourself in the foot. That would make for an awkward bake sale next weekend. Charlotte felt a familiar tension building at the base of her skull, the same tension she used to feel before a mission. But now it was triggered by the effort of restraining herself, of maintaining the facade of meekness she'd cultivated for so long. What Rebecca didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Charlotte had fainted in that self-defense class because the instructor's chokehold had triggered a flashback to a close-quarters combat situation in Kandahar. She'd dropped to avoid hurting him when her training kicked in. Charlotte slipped away to the classroom for the safety briefing, hoping to escape the growing circle of mockers, only to find more familiar faces. 2 faculty members from the college where she worked were also taking lessons, Professor Jenkins from English Literature and Dr. Ramirez from Physics. They noticed her immediately. Miller from Administrative Services? Professor Jenkins squinted at her through his thick glasses. Didn't you mess up the department budget spreadsheets last month, and now you want to handle a firearm? He turned to Dr. Ramirez with a theatrical whisper. God help us all. Dr. Ramirez at least had the decency to look embarrassed by his colleague's rudeness, but he didn't contradict him either. Charlotte took a seat at the back of the room, wishing she could disappear. The spreadsheet error had been Jenkins's own mistake. He'd submitted incorrect numbers for his department's travel expenses. But Charlotte had taken the blame rather than embarrass him in front of the dean. Now he was using that same mistake to humiliate her in public. She wondered, not for the first time, if her strategy of making herself small had been a mistake. In trying to blend in, to avoid attention, had she merely made herself an easy target? Her wish for anonymity was further shattered when Tyler Matthews, the college dean's son, a privileged 20-year-old who worked part-time in his father's office, recognized her from campus. Hey, aren't you the woman who makes copies in my dad's building? He called out across the room, drawing everyone's attention once again. She's going to try shooting. This is going to be epic fail material. He and his 3 friends immediately formed a semicircle around her, phones at the ready. We're starting a betting pool on how long before she runs away crying, Tyler announced to the room at large. I give her 3 minutes. Any takers? Several people called out different times, cash already changing hands as bets were placed on her imminent humiliation. Charlotte stared straight ahead, her face burning but her expression deliberately blank. 15 years of military discipline hadn't entirely deserted her. She knew how to weather a storm without breaking. She'd endured 72-hour surveillance missions in hostile territory, had maintained her position and focus through mortar attacks and gunfire. She could handle a group of privileged college boys and their mockery. Still, each new layer of humiliation chipped away at her resolve, at the walls she'd built around her true self. How much more could she take before something broke? The safety briefing mercifully began, but even the instructor, Wade Simmons, couldn't resist joining the mockery. When it came time for students to introduce themselves and their reasons for taking the course, Wade sighed dramatically when Charlotte's turn came. Look, ma'am, he said after she quietly explained about the break-ins in her neighborhood. We're required to give lessons to anyone who pays, but maybe this isn't your thing? He gestured vaguely at her modest clothing and seemingly nervous demeanor. I've seen your type before. One loud noise and you'll be running for the exit. Charlotte met his gaze steadily. I'd like to try, she insisted quietly. Wade rolled his eyes. Your funeral, he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. But don't come crying when the kickback bruises your shoulder. He moved on to the next student, a 20-something man in a University of Texas cap, who received a completely different welcome. All right, now here's someone who looks like they belong on a range. Sorry I couldn't be there, Wade enthused, clapping the young man on the shoulder. Charlotte noticed a few female students exchanging knowing glances, suggesting she wasn't the first woman to receive this treatment at Blue Ridge. The irony wasn't lost on her, that she, who had once been trusted with million-dollar equipment and the lives of her fellow soldiers, was now deemed incapable of handling a simple handgun. When the class moved to the actual range for practical instruction, things went from bad to worse. The rangemaster, Brock Davidson, a former police officer with a popular online channel about firearms, saw Charlotte enter and immediately spotted an opportunity for content. "Hey everyone, we've got ourselves a special guest today," he announced over the PA system, his voice echoing throughout the large space. "Suburban Mom thinks she's Annie Oakley." All eyes turned to Charlotte as she attempted to prepare her station, fumbling slightly with the unfamiliar rental equipment. Her movements were deliberate, not because she didn't know what she was doing, but because she was forcing herself to act like a novice, suppressing 15 years of muscle memory and training. Every instinct told her to handle the weapon with the efficiency that had once been second nature. But she maintained her cover, playing the role of an inexperienced shooter, just as she'd planned. The weight of the rental Glock felt both foreign and achingly familiar in her hands, like running into an old friend you've deliberately avoided, knowing they hold secrets you'd rather keep buried. Brock approached, microphone in hand, his friend filming with a professional camera. "And here we see a classic example of why certain demographics struggle with basic firearm operations," he narrated as Charlotte pretended to awkwardly load her rental rifle. Notice the trembling hands, the complete lack of confidence. Charlotte wasn't trembling from fear, but from the effort of restraining herself, of not showing that she could field strip and reassemble this particular model blindfolded in under 40 seconds. She'd mastered far more complex weapons systems in conditions that would make this climate-controlled range seem like a luxury resort. But she remained silent, enduring the performance of incompetence that had become her armor in civilian life. Inside, however, something was shifting. A familiar coolness was spreading through her veins, the same mental state she'd entered before a difficult shot, a kind of detached alertness that allowed her to observe everything around her with perfect clarity while remaining emotionally unmoved. It was a dangerous state for Charlotte. It belonged to Staff Sergeant Miller, not to the administrative assistant and mother she'd become. Meanwhile, Rebecca's initial photos had already made their way online to the local community forum. Charlotte's phone buzzed repeatedly in her pocket with notifications as comments flooded in. "Charlotte Miller with a gun? Is this a joke? Someone saved that poor weapon from her? Isn't she the one who cried when her daughter's science project exploded?" Charlotte knew about the posts. Tyler and his friends were gleefully reading the comments aloud, making sure she heard every one. A small-time local reporter who ran a gun enthusiast blog had even shown up, drawn by the social media buzz. "This is gold," he muttered, filming Charlotte's deliberately nervous preparations. "The Suburban Mom Fails at Range article is going to get so many clicks." He hovered nearby, clearly hoping to capture a particularly embarrassing moment. Charlotte could feel her resolve weakening. She hadn't expected this level of public humiliation, hadn't anticipated so many people from her carefully separated worlds colliding in this space. For a moment, she considered walking out, returning to the safe anonymity of her administrative job and PTA meetings, where no one looked too closely or expected too much from quiet Charlotte Miller. But something kept her rooted to the spot. Perhaps pride, perhaps stubbornness, or perhaps the growing realization that the life she'd built was more prison than protection. When Charlotte intentionally dropped a magazine while loading, buying time as she considered how much longer she needed to maintain this charade, the entire range erupted in laughter. Videos instantly started circulating online with hashtags like gunfail and stick to the bake sales. Charlotte could feel the familiar weight of her past pressing against her chest, demanding acknowledgement. For 15 years she'd buried who she really was, had constructed an identity based on what others expected her to be. Meek, unremarkable, unthreatening. She'd done it to protect herself, to give Lily a normal life, to escape the nightmares that had followed her home from Afghanistan. But in this moment of public humiliation, with dozens of eyes watching her, judging her, dismissing her, Charlotte felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Anger. Not the hot, explosive anger that leads to rash actions, but the cold, focused anger that had made her one of the most effective snipers in her unit. The ability to channel emotion into precision. A dangerous clarity was descending over her, the kind that had once allowed her to make impossible shots under impossible conditions. She was reaching a breaking point, a moment when the carefully constructed walls between her past and present were beginning to crumble. The range's owner, retired Army Colonel Frank Peterson, emerged from his office to see what the commotion was about. Charlotte felt a momentary hope. Surely a fellow veteran would put a stop to this circus. But Colonel Peterson, seeing only what everyone else saw, a seemingly nervous suburban mom out of her element, joined the chorus instead. "Ma'am, we have liability concerns here," he stated publicly, standing close enough that everyone could hear. "People like you tend to be a safety risk. Maybe try the virtual shooting simulator at the mall instead. It's more appropriate for your capabilities." His dismissal stung worse than the others. He, of all people, should have known better than to judge a book by its cover. Charlotte had served under commanders like him, had earned their respect through demonstrated skill rather than preconceptions. Now, in civilian clothes, with her hair in a ponytail instead of a regulation bun, she was invisible to him as a fellow soldier. The betrayal from someone who should have recognized a kindred spirit, who should have seen beyond the surface, cut deeper than all the previous mockery combined. She felt the military patch inside her jacket like a burning coal against her skin, a reminder of who she had been, who she still was beneath the careful disguise. Two off-duty police officers at the range exchanged knowing looks within Charlotte's earshot. "This is why female officers need different standards," one muttered, loud enough for her to hear. "Some people just aren't built for this." The other nodded in agreement. Next thing you know, they'll let anyone carry a service weapon. Their casual sexism was nothing Charlotte hadn't heard before, but coming on top of everything else, it pushed her closer to her breaking point. The military patch hidden inside her jacket, the emblem of her sniper unit, her talisman throughout 3 tours of duty, was the only thing she allowed herself to touch for comfort, her fingers finding it through the fabric, as if drawing strength from its presence. She'd earned that patch through blood and sacrifice, through countless hours of training and discipline, through shots that had saved American lives in the harshest conditions imaginable, and now she stood here, being told she wasn't built for this, by men who had never faced what she had faced, who had never had to prove themselves the way she had, again and again, in a world that constantly questioned her right to be there. The final humiliation came when Brock, seeing that Charlotte was about to take her first practice shot, decided to create the ultimate viral moment. "Get that little lady out of here," he shouted, yanking the rifle from her hands. "This ain't no place for housewives." The ammunition Charlotte had carefully loaded spilled across the floor, bullets rolling in all directions. "Women like you should stick to baking cookies, not handling firearms," he sneered, deliberately stepping on her shooting glasses that had fallen in the commotion, crushing them beneath his boot. The entire shooting range erupted in laughter as Charlotte knelt to collect the scattered bullets, her head bowed, her cheeks burning with humiliation. A tight circle formed around her, phones recording her every move. "This'll go viral for sure," someone whispered, loud enough for her to hear. Charlotte slowly rose to her feet, a strange calm settling over her features. Her fingers touched the worn military patch sewn into the inside of her jacket, the emblem of her sniper unit, her talisman throughout 3 tours of duty. Her eyes, once soft and accommodating, hardened to steel as she scanned the mocking faces surrounding her. 15 years of hiding, of being invisible, of suppressing who she really was. And for what? To be humiliated by people who couldn't hit a target at 10 yards if their lives depended on it? People who had never had to hold position for 72 hours without moving, who had never made shots that saved dozens of lives? The weight of her silence suddenly felt unbearable. The laughter reached a crescendo as Brock finished his public mockery of Charlotte. He was about to physically escort her from the building, his hand already reaching for her arm, when the heavy glass door to the range swung open. The immediate hush that fell over the room was so abrupt it was as if someone had flipped a switch, silencing the cacophony of mockery in an instant. A tall, distinguished man in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit entered, his silver hair and ramrod-straight posture immediately commanding attention. Even without a uniform, his military bearing was unmistakable. "General James Harrison," someone whispered in awe. The legendary 4-star general, now heading the National Marksmanship Program after a storied career in special operations, was known to every serious shooter in Texas. His presence alone commanded respect, silencing even the most boisterous range enthusiasts. Charlotte felt her heart rate accelerate. Of all the people who could have walked through that door at that precise moment, General Harrison was simultaneously the best and worst possibility. He would recognize her instantly. He had been her commanding officer during her second tour, had personally awarded her several commendations. There would be no maintaining her cover, no salvaging her carefully constructed ordinary life. The moment of truth had arrived, brought by the most unlikely of coincidences. General Harrison scanned the room with the practiced efficiency of a man who had assessed countless tactical situations, his keen eyes noting every detail. His gaze finally landed on Charlotte, still surrounded by her mockers, still kneeling to collect her spilled ammunition. For a moment he seemed confused, his brow furrowing slightly as trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew. Then recognition dawned in his eyes, quickly followed by something Charlotte recognized immediately: military outrage. The controlled fury of a commanding officer witnessing the mistreatment of one of his own. "Staff Sergeant Miller?" His authoritative voice cut through the silence, the question more statement than inquiry. Charlotte straightened instinctively, years of military discipline surfacing despite her civilian clothes and setting. Her spine snapped straight, her chin lifted, her hands falling naturally to her sides in the position of attention. "Yes, sir." The words came automatically, her voice no longer soft and apologetic but clear and confident. The voice of a soldier, responding to a superior officer. The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone watching closely. This was not the same woman who had entered the range an hour earlier. In 2 words, 15 years of careful disguise had been stripped away, revealing the warrior beneath the suburban mom exterior. Brock looked between Charlotte and the general, a nervous laugh escaping him. "Sir, there must be some mistake. This is just Charlotte, a secretary or something from the community college. She's never held a firearm before today." He gestured dismissively toward Charlotte, though his previous cockiness had diminished considerably in the general's presence. General Harrison raised a single eyebrow, a gesture that had made hardened soldiers confess to infractions before they even knew what they were admitting to. "Is that so?" He approached slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving Charlotte's. "Because unless I'm mistaken, I'm looking at Staff Sergeant Charlotte Eagle Eye Miller, holder of the 3rd highest confirmed long-distance elimination record in Marine Corps history." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by a few gasps and muttered exclamations of disbelief. Charlotte felt her carefully constructed world collapsing around her, but alongside the panic was an unexpected sense of relief. After 15 years of hiding, of being less than she was, the truth was finally breaking free. There was terror in exposure, yes, but also liberation. The liberation of finally being seen for who she truly was, not who she had pretended to be. General Harrison continued, his voice pitched to carry throughout the now silent range. "Staff Sergeant Miller personally saved my entire unit during the Kandahar operation of 2010, maintained her position for 72 hours in hostile territory without food or water to secure our extraction route." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Disbelief mingled with shock as everyone recalibrated their understanding of the woman they'd been mocking moments before. Derek Thompson, Charlotte's neighbor who had started the public humiliation, had gone pale. Rebecca Sawyer was frantically tapping on her phone, presumably deleting her social media posts. Tyler and his friends had lowered their phones, their betting pool forgotten. The room had transformed from a coliseum of mockery to a hushed gallery of astonishment in the span of a single sentence. Charlotte felt suspended between 2 identities: the administrative assistant she had been pretending to be and the decorated sniper she actually was. There would be no going back now, no returning to the comfortable anonymity she had cultivated for so long. The path forward was uncertain, but one thing was clear: she could no longer hide from herself. "That can't be right," Brock protested, though with significantly less conviction. "She can barely hold a rifle." He gestured toward the scattered ammunition, the broken glasses. "Look at her." But people were looking, really looking, perhaps for the first time. And what they saw now was different: the perfect posture, the steady gaze, the controlled breathing of someone who had mastered not just firearms, but herself. The general's eyes narrowed at Brock's continued skepticism. "Perhaps a demonstration is in order." He turned to Charlotte. "Sergeant, if you wouldn't mind?" "For old time's sake." Charlotte hesitated, not from uncertainty about her abilities, but from the sudden realization that her carefully constructed anonymity was shattered beyond repair. After 15 years of hiding who she really was, of building a life where no one looked too closely or expected too much, she was being asked to step back into the light. Back into the identity she'd tucked away along with her medals and commendations in a box in the attic. She touched the military patch inside her jacket one last time. "It's been a while, sir," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "Like riding a bike, Miller," Harrison said with the confident smile of a man who had seen her capabilities firsthand in the most extreme conditions imaginable. "Some skills never leave you." He walked to the rangemaster's desk, his authority so absolute that no one, not even Brock, considered objecting as he unlocked the cabinet where the higher-grade firearms were stored. He retrieved a standard-issue military sniper rifle, one Charlotte recognized immediately. The same model she had used during her last tour. "This should feel familiar," he said, presenting it to her with the respect one professional shows another. Charlotte took the weapon, and the transformation that had begun with her posture completed itself in her hands. She moved with practiced precision, assembling and checking the rifle with the mechanical efficiency of someone performing actions so deeply ingrained they required no conscious thought. Gone was any trace of the nervous administrative assistant. In her place stood a warrior. The room watched in stunned silence as Charlotte handled the rifle with the casual competence of someone reuniting with an old friend. She checked the chamber, adjusted the scope, tested the weight and balance, all with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. Those who had been recording her humiliation continued to record, but now with a very different purpose. This was no longer a spectacle of mockery, but a revelation of hidden truth. 10 shots, 10 targets, General Harrison announced to the room, now packed with spectators as words spread throughout the facility. Then he added with a slight smile that suggested he already knew the outcome: blindfolded. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. "Impossible," their expressions said. "No one could hit a target blindfolded, let alone 10 in succession." Charlotte nodded, allowing the general to tie his white silk handkerchief around her eyes. She took position at the firing line, adjusting her stance slightly to account for her old leg injury. The crowd had grown completely silent, the only sound the soft mechanical clicks as Charlotte prepared her weapon. Even the skeptics were riveted by the scene unfolding before them. "I'll need someone to call the targets," she said, her voice no longer soft and apologetic but commanding, the voice of someone accustomed to giving orders rather than taking them. Brock, still skeptical but now visibly nervous, stepped forward. "Fine," he said, trying to maintain his previous bravado. "Target 350 yards. Charlotte made a minute adjustment to her position, inhaled slowly, and fired. The crack of the rifle was followed by a moment of silence, then excited murmurs as the target showed a perfect bullseye, dead center. Brock cleared his throat. "Target 17, 75 yards. Again, Charlotte adjusted, breathed, fired. Another perfect shot. Another center bullseye. The murmurs grew louder, more amazed. "Target 22, 100 yards, Brock called, his voice now tinged with reluctant respect. Charlotte fired again, and again the result was perfect. Shot after shot, target after target. Each one called at random, each one hit with unerring precision despite the blindfold covering her eyes. By the 10th perfect bullseye, this one at the maximum range distance of 150 yards, there wasn't a closed mouth in the building. Charlotte removed the blindfold, her eyes once again soft but now holding an unmistakable confidence. She placed the rifle carefully on the counter and turned to face the crowd, not with triumph or vindication, but with simple dignity. "Muscle memory," she said simply, as if what she had just demonstrated was no more remarkable than riding a bicycle or swimming a lap. General Harrison smiled, a knowing look passing between them. "The best of the best make the impossible look easy," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's why Staff Sergeant Miller's record still stands, even after all these years." Charlotte looked around at the sea of faces. The neighbors who had dismissed her, the colleagues who had overlooked her, the range staff who had humiliated her, but there was no gloating in her expression, no desire to return the humiliation they had so eagerly heaped upon her. Instead, there was a quiet certainty, the confidence of someone who no longer needed to hide who she was or what she was capable of. For 15 years she had carried the weight of her secrets, buried her accomplishments, diminished herself to fit into the narrow box others had created for her. Now, standing amidst the wreckage of that carefully constructed facade, Charlotte Miller finally allowed herself to breathe. The silence stretched for several long moments, no one quite sure what to say after witnessing something they had believed impossible. It was Colonel Peterson who finally broke it, stepping forward with military precision. "Staff Sergeant Miller," he said, addressing her by her rank rather than the dismissive ma'am he had used earlier. "I owe you an apology. We all do." There were nods of agreement from around the room, shame-faced acknowledgments of the collective error in judgment they had made. But apologies, however sincere, couldn't undo what had been done or restore the anonymity Charlotte had lost. Her life had been irrevocably changed in the span of 10 perfect shots. News of Charlotte's extraordinary display spread like wildfire through Austin and beyond. Within hours, videos of her blindfolded shooting demonstration, and no longer mocking but awestruck, flooded social media with titles like "Secret Sniper Mom" and "The Humble Hero Next Door." Local news stations ran the story on their evening broadcasts, and by Sunday morning, Charlotte's phone was inundated with interview requests from national outlets. The woman who had been invisible yesterday was suddenly the most talked-about person in Texas today. But Charlotte, true to her nature, declined most interviews, preferring to address the situation on her own terms rather than becoming a media spectacle. She sat at her kitchen table Sunday morning, sipping coffee and trying to process the seismic shift in her life, when her daughter Lily returned from her sleepover. "Mom," she said, wide-eyed and clutching her phone, "why are there videos of you shooting blindfolded all over the internet? And why is everyone calling you a war hero?" Charlotte took a deep breath. It was time for another difficult conversation, another revelation of truth. "Come sit down, sweetie," she said gently. "There's something I need to tell you about who I was before I was your mom." General Harrison, with Charlotte's permission, shared the declassified details of her service record. How she had saved 37 lives in a single operation by maintaining overwatch for 3 straight days without sleep. How she'd received not just a Purple Heart for the injury that eventually led to her discharge, but multiple commendations for valor that remained partially sealed in military records. Staff Sergeant Miller exemplifies the quiet heroism that defines our armed forces, he told CNN in a brief statement. "She didn't serve for recognition or glory. She served because that's who she is." The contrast between his respectful assessment and the treatment Charlotte had received at the range only highlighted the injustice of her humiliation. Veterans organizations across the country reached out, offering support and expressing outrage at how she had been treated. Respect the Vet began trending nationally, sparking broader conversations about how former service members, particularly women, were perceived and treated in civilian life. What had begun as a local incident of public humiliation had transformed into a national conversation about prejudice, assumption, and the invisible veterans living ordinary lives in communities across America. Brock Davidson was the first to face consequences for his behavior. His online subscribers abandoned him en masse after his humiliation of a decorated veteran went viral. Sponsors pulled their support from his channel, and the video he'd been so eager to create, "Suburban Mom Fails at Range," backfired spectacularly when viewers recognized it for what it was: the targeted harassment of a woman who had served her country with distinction. "I didn't know," he attempted to explain in a hastily recorded apology video, sitting behind his desk with shoulders slumped, all previous bravado gone. "How was I supposed to know that she had been?" He trailed off, unable to complete the thought without acknowledging his own prejudice. Comments flooded in from veterans and active-duty military personnel, expressing their disgust at his behavior, many sharing their own stories of being underestimated or disrespected in civilian life. Brock's channel, once boasting hundreds of thousands of subscribers, dwindled to a fraction of its former size within days. The Blue Ridge Shooting Range removed his name and image from their website and promotional materials, publicly distancing themselves from his actions, even as they scrambled to reconcile their own role in what had transpired. Rebecca Sawyer's mom blog faced similar backlash. The photos she'd posted without Charlotte's permission, along with her mocking commentary, were screenshotted before she could delete them, circulating as examples of how not to treat others. Her public apology included donations to veterans organizations and a feature on the hidden heroes among us, why we shouldn't judge books by their covers. "I've known Charlotte for years," she wrote, or at least I thought I did. "What I realize now is that I never really saw her at all. I saw what I expected to see, what I wanted to see, not who she actually was. It was perhaps the most genuine thing Rebecca had ever written on her blog, and it resonated with readers in a way her usual aspirational content never had. Her readership doubled, with many new followers commenting that they appreciated her honesty and willingness to acknowledge her mistake. It was a painful but ultimately transformative moment for Rebecca, forcing her to confront the superficiality that had defined much of her online presence. She reached out to Charlotte privately as well, her apology more personal and raw than the public version. "I'm so ashamed," she admitted over coffee at a quiet corner table in Austin's Mozart's Coffee Roasters. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm truly sorry." Professor Jenkins and the college dean arrived at Charlotte's modest home on Sunday afternoon with flowers and a formal written apology. "Miss Miller," the dean began, his discomfort evident in his stiff posture, "words cannot express how deeply sorry we are for the disrespect you were shown." He glanced toward his car, where his son Tyler sat waiting, his expression sullen. "My son, in particular, has much to learn about respect and judgment. He will be completing community service at the local Veterans Center as part of his educational consequences." Charlotte accepted their apology with grace, neither dwelling on the humiliation nor dismissing its impact. "We all have lessons to learn throughout our lives," she said simply. "Some just come more publicly than others." The dean hesitated, then added, "The Board of Trustees would like to discuss creating a veterans support position at the college. Your unique perspective would be invaluable in helping service members transition to academic life. Would you consider taking on a role like that?" Charlotte promised to think about it, recognizing the opportunity to use her experience to help others facing the same challenges she had faced. Colonel Peterson, the range owner who had suggested Charlotte try something more appropriate than his facility, arrived at her home shortly after the college representatives left. His apology was more direct, soldier to soldier. "I failed you, Sergeant," he said, standing at what was nearly attention on her front porch. "I saw a civilian woman instead of looking for the warrior underneath. I should have known better." He offered Charlotte lifetime free membership at Blue Ridge and begged her to consider teaching a women's self-defense course. "We need more women like you, showing the world what's possible," he said, his earlier prejudice conveniently forgotten in light of her newly revealed status. Charlotte considered his offer carefully. "I'll think about it," she said, neither committing nor refusing. "But any course I teach would be open to everyone who wants to learn, not just women." Colonel Peterson nodded quickly. Of course, whatever you think best." As he turned to leave, Charlotte called after him, "And Colonel, those two officers who were discussing female standards, I'd appreciate if you'd have a word with them about modernizing their perspective. Their attitudes don't belong in 2025 any more than they did in 1955. The local reporter who had planned a mockery piece instead wrote a respectful profile titled "The Silent Guardians, Veterans Among Us," which was picked up by national outlets. "In every community across America," he wrote, "there are men and women who have served with distinction, who have seen and done things most of us can barely imagine, and who now live quiet lives among us without fanfare or recognition. They don't seek attention for their service. They simply continue to live by the values that service instilled in them." The article became his most widely read piece, launching a series on veterans' experiences transitioning to civilian life that would eventually win a regional journalism award. The reporter, Jason Wilkins, would later credit Charlotte with changing not just his approach to journalism, but his understanding of what it meant to be truly courageous. "Real heroes," he told a journalism conference in Dallas, "don't wear signs advertising their heroism. They carry it quietly, often invisibly to those of us not paying attention." Through it all, Charlotte maintained her dignity and perspective. When offered the chance to publicly condemn her harassers during a rare interview she granted to a veteran-run podcast, she declined. "We're all more than our worst moments," she told the host, himself a former Navy SEAL. "I serve to protect everyone's freedom, including the freedom to make mistakes and learn from them." Her response earned her even more respect from veterans and civilians alike, who recognized in her words the true character of someone who understood that courage isn't just about facing enemy fire, but about how you treat others when you have the power to harm them. Letters poured in from across the country, many from women in male-dominated fields who had faced similar prejudice and dismissal. "Your story gives me courage," wrote a female firefighter from Oregon. "Not just because you're skilled, but because you refuse to let their cruelty make you cruel in return."